كفاني علم ربي من سؤالي واختياري.
بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. الحمد لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام على أشرف الأنبياء والسيد المرسلين وعلى آله وصحبه وسلم. ربي اشرح لي صدري ويسر لي أمري واحلل عقدة من لساني يفقه قولي. Alhamdulillah. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has blessed us to reach the month of Rajab. This is the first night of Rajab. And the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam used to pray, Barak lana fi Rajab wa Sha'ban wa balighna Ramadan. Oh Allah, bless us in Rajab and Sha'ban and allow us to reach Ramadan. And so we are officially 60 days from Ramadan. Alhamdulillah for the gift of gathering. From amongst the many things that our scholars and our guides mention is that this month is the month of planting. That we plant spiritually and prepare in preparation for the harvest of Ramadan. That you can't harvest if you haven't planted. And so if you hope to yield the fruits of Ramadan, now is the time to plant. And Sha'ban is the month of irrigation, watering. Once you've planted, you must water. And so what are the seeds that we plant? Amongst the special dhikrs to increase in this month are dhikrs of istighfar, seeking God's forgiveness. And istighfar is not only for those of us who have many, many faults. The Prophet ﷺ said astaghfirullah 70 times a day. And amongst the arifin who commented upon this, they said that 70 times a day the Prophet ﷺ was being drawn by Allah to a higher degree of realization of Allah's unity. And so out of adab with Allah, he made istighfar for the previous level that he was. Sallallahu alayhi wasallam. And istighfar is a beautiful practice. Beautiful practice. Even after we pray, astaghfirullah, astaghfirullah, astaghfirullah. Istighfar is not only when you make mistakes, but istighfar is a powerful tool to realize your need for Allah, your faqr, your poverty to Him, subhanahu. And this was the month, Rajab was the month where the Prophet ﷺ was taken on the Isra wa Mi'raj, the night journey, and ascension into the Divine Presence. And inshallah we'll have a special gathering for that day. And so we ask to reap the benefits of this blessed day, and this blessed topic that we're discussing is a perfect topic for this month. So we're reading from the Book of Assistance of Imam Abdullah al-Alawi al-Haddad, one of the great knowers of Allah from the Arabian Peninsula, a direct descendant of the Prophet ﷺ, inheritor of him outwardly and inwardly. And in this book, which is really a spiritual manual for us to progress and to draw near to Allah and to fulfill our true purpose. And last week we spoke about the journey, that we're all on a journey when we were talking about niyyah. And the topic for this chapter is Muraqaba. Muraqaba, the translator, Mustafa Badawi, may Allah be pleased with him, is a very good translator and a very illuminated person himself. He was actually a direct student of Habib Mashur al-Haddad, one of the great saints of the 20th century who was a descendant of Imam al-Haddad. So he kept the company of this great sage and translated his ancestors' works into English. He translates Muraqaba as vigilance, and we'll get into what Muraqaba means. But A good place to start is with the names of Allah. And one of Allah's names is Ar-Raqib, which is from the same root as Muraqaba. Ar-Raqib means the watcher, the one who is observing at all times and witnessing. And so Muraqaba is to have a type of witnessing of your own self. And so it could be translated as vigilance, introspection, meditation. It's to have an awareness of your own self, and we'll discuss the various levels. So Imam al-Haddad begins by saying, Bismillahir-Rahmanir-Rahim, you must, O my brothers and sisters, be mindful of Allah in all of your movements and times of stillness, at every moment, with every blink of the eye, with every thought, wish, or any other state. Feel His nearness to you. Know that He looks and is aware of you, that nothing that you conceal is hidden from Him. Nothing that weighs so much as an atom is hidden from your Lord, whether on earth or in heaven. When you speak aloud, He knows your secret. He knows your secret thought and that which is even more hidden. He is with you wherever you are. If you are of the righteous, min al-abrar, He will guide, assist, and protect you. He then says, have haya, which is, you could say modesty, but it's a type of shyness. Have haya before your Lord as you should. Make sure that He never sees you in a situation which He has forbidden you, and never misses you where He has commanded you to be. Worship Him as if you saw Him, for even if you do not see Him, He sees you. And of course, he's referencing here the beautiful definition of ihsan that our Prophet ﷺ gave when he said, ihsan an ta'bud Allah ka'annaka tarahu fa'in lam takun tarahu innahu yarak. That beauty is to worship Allah or be devoted to Allah as if you are looking at Him. And if you cannot see Him, know that He is seeing you. He is looking at you. He is gazing upon you. And this gets to the essence. And so, Muraqaba is the station of ihsan. And we'll speak a little bit about the various levels of it. Now, last week we talked about the fact that each one of us is on a journey, and that the most common metaphor in our tradition for the perfection of the soul in submission to the Creator is that of a journey, right? The Sharia, the Tariqah, the Salik, Suluk, all of these hadith, all of these verses. But the metaphor, the second most common metaphor for the spiritual path is that of battle. Battle. And the Prophet ﷺ is reported to have said, when returning from a battle with his companions, we have now just left the lesser jihad for the greater jihad. Jihad al-Asghar for Jihad al-Akbar. And they said, Ya Rasulullah, what could be greater than putting our lives on the line to sacrifice for the sake of La ilaha illallah Muhammadur Rasulullah? And he said, the battle which rages within each one of you. And we mentioned that one of the great ones, Abdullah al-Ansari al-Hirati, radiallahu anh, who wrote about manazil al-sa'irin, the stations, the way stations on the journey. That was his Arabic text. He also wrote a Persian one of 100 stations in approaching God, and he called it Sad Maidan, the 100 fields, which one interpretation is the 100 battlefields. And this is really important because each one of us has a true nature which is luminous and which is a spirit. It is ruh, and it is from the divine light and from the divine breath. But as we mentioned last week, the composite nature of the human being means that we also have this lower self, this animal self. We have an inclination towards other than the light. We have something that is pulling us down towards egotism and selfishness. And these inclinations are within each human being. And so the spiritual path and the challenge of being a human being is to overcome or do battle with those lower inclinations that you have. And one of the great ones, Sufyan al-Thawri, he said, I never dealt with anything more difficult on me than my own self. Sometimes it would be against me and sometimes it would be for me. And he also said in another narration, verily sacred knowledge is only studied to become mindful of God, to have taqwa. Knowledge is only favored over other virtues because it makes one, it increases one in taqwa, in awareness and mindfulness. Hassan al-Basri is mentioned. Your enemy is not the one you fight on the battlefield. Rather, your enemy is your own soul between your two sides. And the Prophet ﷺ mentioned to his companions that the one who is strong is not the one who can overpower his enemy, but the one who can control himself when angry. It's important to understand the context of the Prophet ﷺ and where he was. And he was with a tribe of warrior poets, essentially. That every man was a warrior. There was no option, right? There was no standing army. There was no police to call. To be a man meant to be a warrior. And by the way, there were many women warriors as well. Nusayba was one of them, radiyallahu anha. But to be a man was to be a warrior. You couldn't say, I'm a pacifist. Right? No. Your tribe would get wiped out. No pacifists. And the Prophet ﷺ, in speaking to these warriors, he was telling them, you should continue to be warriors. You should not stop being warriors. But you should understand that the true war is what rages within us. And the truth of the matter is that nowadays we may think of warriors as, a negative thing, but it's not. The true people, the true warriors are those who have conquered their lower selves. And if you look at the traditional martial arts in all different civilizations, warriors were those who had subdued their lower self and who sacrificed themselves for the greater good of others and protected their people, and who were willing to lay down their lives for the protection of the innocent. And even Plato, the great philosopher, in his conversation on the virtues, he said the greatest manifestation of virtue is to ride out for battle against the enemy that is coming to attack your city. Right? Because you're giving your life for the innocent people amongst your people. And if you read Black Elk Speaks, the Lakota sage of the First Nations, Black Elk talks about that he was born in the period before contact with the Europeans, and then he lived a long life, so he saw everything change dramatically. And he was someone who had kashf, he had unveiling, and he was shown what would happen to his people. But he mentions that what it meant to be a boy in the Lakota tribe was that your games were that you got up on a horse and you tried to knock the other boy off the horse, right? That was how they played. And he mentioned that when you got to be a bit older, 7 or 8 or 9, that when there would be a raid from another tribe, that all the men would round up. They would round up into a circle, and the women and children would come to the center, and all the men would mount up and would go to ride out to defend them. And the men would select the young boys who are on the cusp of adulthood and would say, "You're ready, you're ready, you're ready. Come with us." And to those boys that were not yet ready, they would say, "You guard the women and children, but stay on horseback." So this sense that even if you're 6 or 7 or 8, you are being trained in this way. And now, of course, if the enemy got to the women and children, that means all the men had been annihilated. So it was somewhat symbolic. But this is helpful to understand the context of the prophetic seerah, that we're so used to, right, nation states and standing armies and police forces. They had none of that. It was the strong devour the weak. And tribal allegiance was everything. Tribal allegiance was everything. And so the Prophet ﷺ, he's not telling them to not be warriors, but he's telling them there is a higher battle. There is a higher battle that each one of us has to fight. And this relates, mashallah, this relates to the fact that we have various levels of our nafs. So we have, and the scholars separate it into 3 or 7. They talk about the various levels of the nafs. But the important thing is that our true nature is spirit. And however, we have this soul, this nafs, this ego self. And it's part of Allah's wisdom that each one of us has this, and it has a command. The ruh is from the command of Allah. The ego has a command to other than that. And so each one of us, and we can all relate to this, that we all have like multiple selves inside of us, right? We want to do certain things, but we end up doing other than that, right? We want to, so who is it that wants and who is it that is thwarting our plans, right? And so the science of tasawwuf at its essence, the spiritual dimension of our tradition, the science of ihsan, is really about understanding yourself and your various levels of the self. So we have this self that commands the evil, nafs al-amara bisu, which is mentioned in the Quran in Surah Yusuf. And the essence of it is that it actually wants to be master. It wants to be God. It wants to be worshipped. One of the great archetypes of this in the Quran is Fir'aun. Right? He's like an archetype of this ego self. Ana rabbukum al-a'la, I am your Lord Most High, he says, right? And so even those that may not make that type of claim, we all have this pull towards that. Now, when someone starts to have a type of awakening and learns wisdom and receives guidance, they have what we call conscience, right? A higher self that is calling you towards the light. And in the Quran, it's called nafs al-lawama. And it's that reproachful self. It actually calls you to account when you're not doing what you should be doing, right? And so this begins then the battle. This is the battle that we all have raging inside of us. And there's a Native American proverb that there is a wolf of light and a wolf of darkness fighting inside of each one of us. And the one that wins is the one that you feed most. And so how do you feed the light? It is by doing acts of light and speaking words of light and studying the revelation of light and following the Prophet of light, sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and then it becomes easier. And that lower pull becomes weaker. And that voice that's calling you away becomes softer. And eventually, those who attain perfect submission to Allah, they attain nafs al-mutma'inna. Ya ayyatuha an-nafs al-mutma'inna, irji ila rabbiki radiyatan mardiyah in the Quran. O self at peace. Mutma'inna is like peace or tranquility or serenity. Return to your sustainer, pleased and pleasing. And that's why some of them, when they break it down, there's not just nafs al-mutma'inna, but there's radiyah and mardiyah, pleased and pleasing. These are like dimensions of that self. And so we all have these various selves. Now the self at peace is the self that has, where the call away from the light has ceased to be, and now the self is essentially, you could say, wed to the spirit. The nafs is wed to the ruh, perfectly submitting, perfectly surrendering. And the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam alluded to this when he said that each person has a shaitan assigned to them. And they said, even you, Ya Rasulullah? And he said, yes, but mine has become Muslim. Right? And this is why it's important, this etymology of words. A Muslim is literally one who has surrendered. Meaning, they have surrendered their lower self to the Creator. And thereby, their spiritual self has come forth. This is the true meaning of a Muslim. And that is why for us, everyone who followed any of the prophets or messengers is a Muslim, according to the Quran. Right? And in fact, everything in creation, the plants and the animals, the mineral kingdom, they are all in a state of surrender. They are all Muslimin. So to be a Muslim, to surrender, is to really be in a state of harmony with reality. And everything, all the creation is naturally in that state, except the human being has the option to go out of that state. And that's why the angels said, will you create one who will shed blood and sow discord upon the earth? And Allah said, I know what you know not. And part of the secret of that is that to choose to surrender is different than to surrender when you have no choice. And Allah gave us free will because He loved. And a beloved knows that love must be given freely, it must be chosen. Right? You can't go in the street and say to someone you fancy, I command you to love me. That's not how it works. Love must be given. And so Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gave us the option, the choice to turn to other than Him. But may we never turn to other than Him. Ameen. So one of the analogies of the self, if we think about these, what's going on inside of us, one of the allegories that is given in Surah An-Nur, in the chapter of light, when we have these beautiful verses, gives this likeness to a lamp in a niche. And if you think of this, some of the commentators have said that this is referring to the human being. And so if you think about a lamp, right, a traditional lamp, now we just flip the, right? But a lamp would have oil at the bottom. And it would have a wick that then went up, and then it would have the flame. And then it would be within a glass, like these here. These ones are not real, but you get the idea. And so the oil itself is not luminous, right? The oil itself is not luminous, but it gives itself and it gives light to the wick, right? So by giving itself, the flame becomes brighter, right? And then, of course, the glass is around it and it protects the flame. It protects the flame. And in fact, when it is a clear glass, it magnifies the flame. Right? Now, what is this? What are the elements in this metaphor? The scholars say that the nafs is like the oil. That our lower self, our self is like the oil. And our ruh is the flame. And we come embodied. And what we're supposed to do in a healthy human being, your selfhood, which is not a negative thing, your animal nature, yourself, you're giving it such that your spirit can become luminous. You're essentially burning up the qualities of selfhood such that your true self comes out, right? Now, the glass is the heart. The glass is the heart. Because when the glass is clear and pure, the light becomes even more brilliant. But when the glass is covered over or dirty or filled with smoke, the light is actually dimmed. And so, and we know this, that a lamp, a reflecting surface can actually make the light shine more brilliantly, because like in Seattle, if you go to the water on a sunny day, right, it's incredibly bright. It's like 1,000,000 suns, right? They're reflecting off the surface. So likewise, the heart is like that. That when a heart is pure, it reflects the light of the Spirit into this world. However, when the heart becomes corroded over with wrong actions and with egotism, then the Spirit becomes hidden. And it's hard for us to even experience the Spirit, even though it's always there. So growing up in the Pacific Northwest, and maybe some of you can relate to this, in the summertime especially, we used to like to make bonfires on the beach. And if you burn the driftwood, and we would make it like a tent, and we would set it on fire. You have to get the kindling, and then you have to get some of the newspaper, right? And then it goes up. And it burns very beautifully. It's a big flame and just a little bit of smoke, not very much smoke. However, often what would happen is accidentally we threw a log in there that, unbeknownst to us, it was covered in some of the pitch and the tar, because it was originally from the railroad. And when you threw one of those up there, this toxic smoke would emit. And it would be this black cloud. And you would have to run into the fire and pull it out because you couldn't breathe. It was this poison. And so we learned to observe the sticks and make sure it wasn't one with the tar on it. And usually you could notice if you had a discerning eye, right? Likewise, when we surrender to Allah, and when we are in a state of submission to Allah and we're following the sacred law, then the oil of our nafs burns clean. We burn off any impurities, and our spirit starts to magnify. However, when we go outside of the sacred precincts that Allah has laid down for us, it is like, and we fall into wrong action and wrong deeds and egotism and the vices. It is like throwing the pitch into that fire, and this black smoke comes up in the globe of our heart. And this darkness envelops our spirit. Such that there are people that it is as if they have no spirit at all, even though they do, everyone does. But some people get to the point where they can do such harm and such atrocities and such evil that it's as if the ruh is gone, because it's so covered with the smoke. And so this allegory helps us to understand. And this is why the Prophet ﷺ said that everything has a polish, and the polish of the heart is remembrance of God. Remembrance of God is polishing the heart. And this is why there's one level of religion, which is that one fears punishment, fears divine punishment. And there's another level of religion that someone hopes for divine reward. And those levels are important and they have their place. But the higher level, as one progresses, one understands that one is only harming oneself by distancing oneself from one's creator and one's true nature by doing wrong action. And that all of the commands and prohibitions are gifts for us to become who we truly were created to be. And then one acts out of love. And acts out of love such that even the fear is only a fear of being distanced from the beloved. It's a fear that the light will be removed from one's heart, and that one would no longer be able to see with the light of God. Because ultimately, the light that is in us is His light. The breath that is in us is His breath. وَنَفَخْتُ فِيهِ مِنْ رُوحِي. And so we ask Allah to allow us to uncover our true nature and to purify our hearts from what veils us from Him subhanahu wa ta'ala. Now, Imam al-Haddad offers a number of remedies to remind yourself of Allah, and he mentions that it's a type of ma'rifah, it's a type of knowledge, an experiential knowledge of God. And a lack of that is what distances us from presence. Because every believer knows that we're in the divine presence and that nothing that we do is hidden from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. He said, but the important thing is that that becomes permanent. It's not just a fleeting state, but it becomes permanent. Now, Imam al-Ghazali has a book in the Ihya, in his encyclopedia of the spiritual path, called Muraqaba and Muhasaba, where he talks about Muraqaba and Muhasaba. Now, Muraqaba is what we're talking about, is a type of present awareness. And you could think of it like this: your spirit is watching your nafs. And you observe the promptings of the nafs, but you make sure that the nafs is not ruling you or leading you, but that your spirit is guiding it. Because the nafs is not evil, it's not bad, even though we talk about jihad al-nafs, killing the self and annihilation of the self, like that has its place. But they also talk about disciplining the self. And that the self is like a steed, right? That a wild horse, you can't ride it, it will buck you, but you have to discipline it. So you don't want to destroy yourself. You want to transform yourself. You want to transform yourself. Now, muhasaba So if muraqaba is in the moment, in the present tense, observing yourself, muhasaba is after the fact. It's like retrospective. It's looking back. How was I? And so some of them would have a practice of doing it every night before they go to sleep, reflecting on their day. Okay, my ego got the best of me in that interaction. Okay, I became angry in this situation. And take yourself to account. Others would do that after every prayer. So we just prayed Isha. They would take a few minutes after prayer to reflect on everything they had done or said or even thought since Maghrib. This level of awareness is what allows the spirit to become your dominant state and not just trapped in the ego's poles. And so Imam al-Ghazali talks about 3 levels of muraqaba. And they're ascending levels. MashaAllah. The first level of muraqaba is to not do anything that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has commanded you not to do. It's muraqaba of the limbs, of af'al, of the actions. That you have a state of awareness with everything that you do. Right? And you understand that you're in the divine presence and in the divine gaze. And through practicing this normal, it becomes an abiding state. So one of the stories that Imam al-Ghazali says, he said one of the Arifin, one of the great saints, when he was a boy, he was in class and the teacher was teaching them halal zabiha, slaughter, right? And he gave them all a chicken, a live chicken, to take home and to do the lesson. And he said, slaughter the chicken where no one can see you. Take it away from the city. Don't just like start killing chickens in front of people, right? Go by yourself and do it. And then, take it home and with your mother, cook a meal and feed your family. It was an important lesson. So all of the boys come the next day, with the dishes that they had cooked. But one boy has his live chicken still. Right? So his teacher says, you're such a good student. You always do the assignment. Why did you not do your homework? And he said, forgive me, Ya Ustad. I tried to do the assignment, but I kept going further and further from the city and trying to find a place where no one could see me. But I found that everywhere I was, Allah could see me. I couldn't do it. And so this is the state of, the Arifin as children. But this is the sense, is that one experiences the divine gaze and it gives one a type of haya, a type of shyness, that you would be somewhere where Allah would not like you to be, or that you wouldn't be in a place where He would love you to be. It's that type of awareness. That's the first level. The second level is muraqaba of the heart. The first level, you're observing outwardly your actions and your words. The second level, you're observing your heart, your motivations, your intentions, right? You observe even the way where your ego tries to defend yourself if someone challenges you, right? To give like a very practical example, right? If your spouse, if you say you're out to dinner with your spouse and you're looking at your phone, then they get on you, right? You're looking at your phone again. The nafs, right, is like, wants to defend. It was important, it was work, it was this, right? But someone with muhasaba of this level observes the desire to defend themselves, but yet checks that and says, the principle of being fully present with my spouse is true and I'm wrong. And even though it may be a small thing and I want to say, it's just a small thing, why are you making a big deal? The principle is significant and I should not defend myself. And instead, the words that come out are, you're right, forgive me. But this level And this is happening at all times because we have promptings, khawatir, that are coming from different levels of ourself. There's a whole kind of subgenre in our spiritual tradition of understanding where the khawatir, these promptings, are coming from. Some come from the lower self, some come from higher, some come from angelic presence, some come from the divine reality itself. So being able to discern what is this prompting coming from, and be the master of your own heart, essentially. And this is easier said than done, and this is a long path, and it takes a greater degree of presence, a greater degree of discernment and inner perception. But eventually, when one continues to have this level of presence with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, one reaches the third degree, and that is of the siddiqun, the true realized ones. And it's this type of awareness where you're so present with the divine gaze that you actually become absent from all else. You're so immersed in remembrance of Allah that you become effaced from remembrance of creation. There are those who are so present with Allah that the world of multiplicity fades away and they experience a divine presence. And in the higher degrees of that realization, multiplicity actually returns, but they're still with Allah. They're not veiled from it by Allah. And this is the state of the prophets and their true inheritors. And it's rare. It's rare. But some people get glimpses of it, right? And perhaps each one here has had a taste of it, maybe in the last third of the night or in Ramadan in the last 10 days, where you feel a sense of the presence of the divine is extremely potent. There are those who they never leave that state. And even states beyond that, may Allah not deprive us of what He has gifted His loved ones. Ameen. And so we ask Allah to allow us to be aware of Him. Now, He mentions in this book that whenever you notice in your soul any laziness in His worship or inclination to disobedience, remind it that God hears and sees you and knows your secrets in secret conversation. So that's step one. Just remind yourself. And this is beautiful too. What He's saying is to have, literally, He's saying, have a conversation with your nafs. Like, oh my nafs, why are you calling me to this? You know this is a dead-end path. You know that Allah is seeing everything and we're not going to get away with anything. Why? Really? We should be talking to ourselves. And people will think you're crazy. But remember Allah until they call you Majnun. He says something interesting. Step 2. If this reminding does not benefit because of the inadequacy of its knowledge of the majesty of God, like if your nafs is still recalcitrant, disobedient, right? Reminded of the 2 noble angels who record good and evil deeds, and recite to it. Right? Recite to it the verse, when the 2 receivers receive, sitting on the left and the right, he utters no word, but there is with him a watcher ready. So that's the second one. It's to remind yourself that everything is being written, everything is being observed. The angelic presence is with you. Right? If this reminding does not influence it, remind it of the proximity of death, that it is the nearest of all hidden and awaited things. Frighten it of its sudden pouncing, whereby if it does come when it is in an unsatisfactory state, right? Ala hala ghayra mardiya, right? Unpleasing, it will end up in endless loss. If this threat is of no promise, is of no use, remind it of the immense reward which God has promised those who obey Him, and the painful torment with which He has threatened those who disobey Him. Say to it, O soul, After death, there will be no opportunity to repent. And there will be after this life only the garden or the fire. Choose, if you will, obedience, the consequence of which is triumph, contentment, and immortality in vast gardens, and looking at the face of God, the generous, the beneficent. Or else disobedience, the consequence of which is degradation, humiliation, mockery, deprivation, and imprisonment between layers of fire. Endeavor to cure your soul with such reminders when it neglects obedience and inclines to rebellion, for they are useful medicines for the heart's diseases. And this is really what it comes down to, that the great prophets and their inheritors, they are the physicians of the heart. And just as people can become physically unwell, many people are spiritually unwell. And in fact, for us, there is, you could say, true wellness is wilayah, is friendship with God, is nearness to God, is a high station. The prophet is well. And most of us, we have degrees of sickness that we are trying to overcome. And so everything that the Prophet ﷺ came with and was sent with is medicine. And one of the sisters in our community, she mentioned that her grandmother used to always say, her grandmother passed away, Allah, and she was sad, but she said the thing that she remembered her grandma always used to say, An-Nabi dawa, the Prophet is medicine. The Prophet is medicine. The Prophet is medicine, sallallahu alayhi wa sallam. Then he says, what is a sign that this Muraqaba is coming, that you're starting to kind of awaken to this state? If you find emerging in your heart, when you call to mind the fact that God observes you, a shyness that prevents you from disobeying Him and drives you to exert yourself in obeying Him, you are in possession of something of the realities of vigilance. Haqa'iq Muraqaba. So when you feel that sense of shyness to disobey your Creator, that means that's a good sign, alhamdulillah. The heart is coming to life, right? He then says, know that Muraqaba is one of the most noble stations, high positions, and lofty degrees. It is the station of ihsan, indicated in the Prophet's saying, may blessings and peace be upon him. Excellence is to, ihsan is to worship God as if you saw Him, for if you do not see Him, He sees you. Each believer has faith that nothing on earth or in heaven is concealed from God, that God is with him wherever he is, and that none of his movements or times of stillness are concealed from him. But the important thing is that this awareness be permanent and that its results appear. The least of which is that he does nothing when alone with God that he would be ashamed of should a man of virtue see him. Right? So think about that. Someone who you look up to, your sheikh or sheikha, and think of the most righteous person you know. That you do nothing when you're all alone that you wouldn't do in the presence of that person. That's a helpful practice to get into, because for some of us, we still feel that Allah is too high, Allah is too distant, even though He is nearer to us than our jugular vein, and He is really the closest thing to us. But still, it's helpful to imagine the most righteous person that you know, them observing you. And this is a practice that to envision yourself in the presence of your shaykh or the Prophet ﷺ is a powerful spiritual practice. And to be as you would be in their presence. And there are people who are so immersed in remembrance of Allah and remembrance of the Prophet ﷺ that they would do nothing different if the Prophet ﷺ was to walk through that door into this room. Because they know that inwardly they are in his presence, sallallahu alaihi wasallam. He then says, this is rare. To be in that state is rare. And it eventually leads to that which is rarer still, whereby the servant is totally immersed in God, annihilated in him, and thus rendered unaware of all else, absent from creation through his contemplation of al-Haq, the ultimate reality, having arrived at a secure seat in the presence of an able sovereign. And so, if we think about this, and it's really helpful for modern people, I find that we want to move from the state of theoretically being Muslim to actualizing Islam. And Islam has infinite degrees, in fact. And we spoke about this, that we all do things and say things and think things that if we were absolutely aware of the divine gaze, that we're in the divine presence, we would not do or think or say. So the spiritual path, this jihad al-akbar, is about struggling against oneself when we are heedless, when we're heedless of the divine presence. And the truth of the matter is that there is only a thin veil between us and Allah. Just like when we close our eyes, we can't see the world, but it's this thin piece of skin that is veiling us from vision. The ego is actually thinner than your eyelid, and it's the only thing between you and Allah. And those who remove the ego, they open Ayn al-Qalb, the eye of the heart. And they have a witnessing of Allah with their heart. And so one of the analogies we gave before was that of virtual reality. And I suggest to everyone, if you've never put on a virtual reality headset, that you do it at least once in your life. And probably soon you won't be able to avoid it, but it was really powerful to experience. And most of you, maybe many of you have done it, but if you haven't, what happens is you put this thing on and you become immersed immediately in another world. And you have an avatar, you have yourself in that realm, and you're experiencing everything you're experiencing, and you become heedless of the place that you actually are, right? That's why you might see these videos of people like, right, falling through their glass table in the kitchen or whatever because they forget where they are. And the truth of the matter is that our ruh, our spirit, was given our self, our nafs, like a type of headset. And we're immersed in this world. The Prophet ﷺ, before virtual reality, he essentially was getting at this when he said that people are sleeping and when they die, they wake up. Because likewise, the one who enters into a dream and has whatever experiences he has, and some of them are joyous and pleasurable, some of them are frightful and terrible, some of them are confusing, and he may, in his dream, enter and have a family and go to school and have a degree and live a life, right? But he never left the place that he fell asleep. Likewise, none of us have ever left the divine presence. And our spirit is still in the divine presence. And we are too. And when death comes and our spirit and our soul is taken out of our body, it is like the removal of the headset, and we're face to face with the real, subhanahu wa ta'ala. And so we are in delusion if we think that right now we are not alone in the room with Allah. That's all that's happening, ever, is that we're alone with Allah. And it's one thing to know that theoretically, and it's another thing to experience that. Because, believe it or not, and this is what Imam al-Haddad is saying, there are people that in this world, the headset is removed. They're in this world, but they're witnessing Allah with the eye of their heart. And the Prophet ﷺ was like that. And this is the month of his Isra wa Mi'raj, when he came into the divine presence. And so, we ask Allah to help us with the battle with ourselves. And with Him, it's easy. If we try to fight the battle of ourselves, by ourselves, with ourselves, we will be defeated by ourselves. However, if we call on the Lord of ourselves, the Master of ourselves, the Creator of ourselves, He, subhanahu wa ta'ala, will make it easy and will grant openings and will cast the light of Iman into our heart so that we see the self for what it is and we transform the self and we see the world for what it is. And then we will become like the Prophet and his true inheritors who are awake in the dream. Awake in the dream. And these ones who, out of the mercy that Allah has transcribed upon them, they come to those of us who are still asleep in the dream. And they call to us to awaken. And they provide the means of that prophetic medicine, which is itself awakening. And so we ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to bless our teachers and bless our guides and bless the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, Muhammad, and all of the prophets amongst his brothers, from the prophets, from Adam until his time, all of those mentioned in the Quran and all of those not mentioned by name, every one of them that was sent to every nation, and every one of their inheritors and followers, and every one of them who took from them the light of La ilaha illallah Muhammadur Rasulullah into their being and became transformed and illuminated by it. And we ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to make us amongst them and with them in this world and the next. And may we never be heedless of His gaze. And may we witness His witnessing us until we become absent from all else but the witness. Subhanahu wa ta'ala ar-Raqib al-Shaheed, Ya Arhamar Rahimeen. We ask this by all His noble names, and it is good adab with Allah to ask Him for great things. So we ask Him for the ranks of those that He loves, to be drawn near to Him in the way that He loves, to truly fulfill the purpose of our existence, bi lutfin wa khairin wa afiyah, with gentleness and with ease and with well-being. We ask Allah to have mercy and bless everyone who is in darkness, and everyone who is suffering, and everyone who is turning away from Him, and everyone who is heedless of Him, and everyone who is preferring the fleeting to the eternal, and everyone who is searching for a way back to Him but doesn't know how, Ya Arhamar Rahimeen. Manifest your mercy to each one of them, Ya Arhamar Rahimeen. To all the believers, we ask that Allah rectifies the state of the Ummah and allows us to truly take the light of La ilaha illallah Muhammadur Rasulullah and to be illuminated by it, and that many are illuminated through it. Ya Allah, just as a candle lights other candles without diminishing its flame, Ya Arhamar Rahimeen. Ameen, ameen. Ila hadrat Nabi al-Fatiha. Ameen.